It's been a couple of days now and I've had some time to reflect upon England's devastating loss to South Africa in a Rugby World Cup semi-final by a single point, which is a sentence in which really does hurt to say after England led for so long in that match, right until the last couple of minutes in which the victory was snatched out of English hands by the South Africans. But fair play to them. They always say the championship sides find a way to win and find a way to win ugly, and South Africa did just that. In today's video, I'm going to be assessing each of the players' performances as well as giving them a score out of 10. I'll then pick a best player from each side and then an overall man of the match. I'm going to start off with the English team first of all. I'm going to start in the front row. Joe Marler for me gets an 8, Jamie George a 7, and then an 8 for Dan Cole. The English scrum didn't dominate at any point in the game, but I do feel these two props in Marler and Cole definitely exceeded expectations, or definitely exceeded my expectations personally. Scrummaging against Kitsoff and Malherbe, two real powerful scrummagers. I felt they did very well to hold their weight and not give away copious amounts of scrum penalties, in which we did in the last Rugby World Cup. So it was a good performance from these two older props, I think it's fair to say. I think it'll be both of their last Rugby World Cups, definitely for Dan Cole, and I would imagine so for Joe Marler as well. I think in their last big knockout match, they did themselves proud. At hooker, Jamie George gets a 7. He was relatively good throughout the whole game, but it was the last 10 minutes in which a couple missed lineouts, a couple skewed throws, one in which just completely slipped out of his hands because of a very greasy night in Paris. But yeah, Jamie George did well throughout the majority of the game, but in the last 10 minutes he gave away a couple errors which let South Africa into the game. In terms of the second rows, Maratoji really stepped up, I feel. He gets an 8.5, and then George Martin an 8. Toji was really good in the lineouts, nicking plenty of ball, which was fabulous, and helped England really disrupt the South African play. George Martin, who this is by far the biggest test match he's ever played in. As such a young player, he's very limited. I think he's single figures in caps. He did very well to come into such a pressure cooker environment and really not fold. He was very good throughout the game, good at line-out time, disrupting ball once again, and you could definitely feel the impact of a slightly bigger and harder tackler, which was very important against the big South Africans. Moving into the back rows, Courtney Lawes for me gets an 8.5, Tom Curry an 8, and Ben Earl an 8. I thought Courtney Lawes was really good once again. He's just recently announced his retirement, which is a shame, but you always felt it was coming, especially at his age. But once again, similar to Dan Cole, in his last knockout game, he did himself proud. Plenty of good turnovers, good disruption, good physicality all round. Talking of physicality, I thought Tom Curry did exceptionally well. He's one of the biggest English back rowers. And look, with Lawes, who's more of a second row potentially, and then Ben Earl, who's a very small number 8, you need someone like Tom Curry, who's sort of 120 kilos or thereabouts, to really throw his weight around and put in some big collisions, and he did just that. So fair play to him. Ben Earl, a decently quiet game, but he got through so much work, especially defensively, really running around, hitting all the rucks. You could just see him. He's one of the forwards which is the most mobile, and when it comes to the scrum time as well, off the number 8, where England were really under pressure at scrum time from the big South African pack, he did well to run off the back of the scrum and make some metres. In terms of the half-backs, Alex Mitchell for me gets a 7.5, and then Owen Farrell for me gets a 9. Alex Mitchell was a decent game, nothing too shocking or anything like that. I feel like it wasn't really his style of test match. Obviously playing for Northampton Saints, he likes a fast-paced game, he likes to play attacking rugby, but he was forced to play a set-piece based game in this game. I thought he did alright, a couple kicks in which weren't ideal, but on the whole some of his box kicks did force some good errors, but ultimately it wasn't his style of game. Owen Farrell for me gets a 9. I thought he was exceptional throughout the game. His boot kept England in it and it almost got them the win, and then ultimately it was the drop goal from sort of 45 plus on the angle which nearly secured England the win, but it was 3 points from the drop goal nonetheless, which put England in a good position. He sacrificed from getting a 9.5 for me from that sort of, I don't know what to call it, the little bit of a scrappy situation with Cobus Ryanak, where he just simply wouldn't give him the ball, conceded 10 metres, then South Africa slot the 3 points. A couple things like that, which is just so frustrating that you don't need to give already a world-class team in South Africa the opportunity to exploit. And then into the back line, Elliot Daly for me gets an 8, and then Johnny May gets an 8 on the wings. I thought these two were very good when it came to kick chase. They were very limited in the game in terms of they didn't have an awful lot to do other than kick chase. It wasn't a game in which they could utilise their attacking footwork or anything like that, but they did well to chase balls all day long. And then in the centres, Similar theme to the wingers really. 7.5 for both Tuolangi and Marchant. They just chase balls all day from box kicks, and Owen Farrell putting up and unders up, to be honest. They didn't do anything wrong particularly. They weren't superb. They just did their jobs, which was ultimately to kick chase for the majority of the game. And then at the back, Freddie Stewart gets an 8. Very good under the high ball. As always, he was really important in this game. Maybe give him an 8.5 actually. I thought he was really solid under the high balls. And in a game in which it was all about the high ball and the kick tennis, I thought he did very, very well. In terms of the English bench, Theo Dan is a sort of a void because he didn't get on the pitch. And then the 22 and 23 in Ford, who came on for 2 minutes, and Lawrence, which came on for not a lot of time at all, are going to just get void answers. But then in terms of the rest of them, it's very difficult for me because these guys didn't play an awful lot of time, but they both get 6s in Genge and Sinclair. Mainly because of what happened at the scrum at the end. They weren't, poor in open play. They were decent in open play. Genge offered a really good carry, so maybe scraped a 6.5, but it came down to the scrums. That's where the game was won and lost, and it wasn't an area in which they succeeded. The last penalty against Ellis Genge, which secured them the 3 points. Sinclair got pinged at times, which alleviated South African pressure. It was disappointing. I know the South Africans, especially the bench that came on for South Africa, are so powerful, so I can't have too many sort of qualms, but ultimately it came down to the scrum, and these two props didn't manage to hold up to the South African pressure. And then Ollie Chesham I thought was decent, 7.5, gets through a heap of work, and he really did give his all when he came on. And then Billy Vanapola for me gets a 6. He came on, I think, for a HIA. He then dropped a ball which put South Africa in a position to score, and then they take the 3 points. And then when he came on in the second half, I love Billy. He's a Saracens player through and through. He's been exceptional for England over the years, was unreal in the last World Cup. But he dropped the ball, metaphorically and literally in this game, and gave the South Africans some scrums off of the knock-ons, which they could ultimately turn into penalties and points, which was rather frustrating. And then Danny Kerr came on. He didn't do an awful lot wrong, to be honest. He just fitted in the same sort of way as Mitchell. They didn't do an awful lot of running because it was a very kick-dominant game. So moving on to the South Africans, I'm going to start off with their front row, 7, 8 and 7. Kits and Malherbe. The reason they get lower than Marler and Cole, not necessarily because they played much worse, is more they just didn't live up to their expectations. The main thing that their game sort of built around is their scrummaging, and they didn't manage to yield any penalties or much dominance from that. And around the field, I felt they were a little bit sloppy at times. I don't feel like they were their same big ball carrying selves in which they usually are. Abrambi in the middle at hooker gets an 8. He had to stay on for pretty much the whole game, I think it was. Fulry came on, which is his, if you look on the bench, it's his replacement, but he came on into the back row, which means Biombi had to stay on the whole game. So fair play to him as a hooker, exceeding 100 and something kilos or whatever he is, to be able to carry that weight around for 80 minutes in a physical and attritional game deserves some credit. And then into the second rows, it's a 6.5 for Eben Etzebeth and a 7 for Mostert. Etzebeth's one of my favourite South African players. He's such a man mountain and was imperative in the win. I actually got a really high score last week against the French, but ultimately it wasn't his best game today. He got substituted, I think it was really early in the second half, or might have been even late first half. I think it was second half though, for RG Snyman. Because Etzebeth wasn't really at the races, the line-out wasn't going too well, and they needed some fresh blood. Mostert, similar to Etzebeth, he didn't really get in the flow, especially at the line-out, getting disrupted by Laws and Itoje, but he did come back into the game later on because he stayed on for the duration. And then into the back row, 7s for Khaleesi and Pieter-Steph du Toit with 6.5 for Dwayne Vermeulen. I didn't think Vermeulen was really at the races either. He got smashed a couple of times by the English kick chase. And for such a big ball carrier, which is so dynamic, I thought he could. I expected more from him. I thought Jasper Wiese, if he played, would have had a better impact. So maybe that's a selection reflected in the selection for the final. And then Khaleesi and du Toit, both. I think Khaleesi got subbed really early as well. So taking off your captain, such a bold call. Khaleesi and du Toit, they didn't do anything really that wrong. I think du Toit dropped a couple balls at points, but nothing too bad from them. But they just didn't really implement their massive level of physicality over the English forwards. And then into the backs, Cobus Reinach for me didn't really excel either. 6.5 with Manny Labok getting a 6. Lebok, I feel, really struggled early on. He wasn't the sole reason for the South Africans not performing, but a lot of his kicks weren't going where they needed to be. He wasn't quite finding his range. And ultimately, with Pollard on the bench having such a world-class replacement, it's hard not to bring him on. And then Ryanak didn't do anything awfully wrong, but he didn't really excel either. Some of the box kicks he was putting up were not the best. Maybe a 6.5 is harsh, maybe he should get a 7, but he didn't really impact the game positively and had a couple errors as well. And then in terms of the wingers, Colby for me gets a 7, and then Arendse getting a 6.5. Both of these players were subject to large aerial bombardments from Farrell and Mitchell, in which I feel the English wingers actually got the better of them, constantly tapping that ball back. Colby and Arendse, as well as probably Willemse at the back as well, really struggled under the high ball, which is why their scores are so low. Apart from that, they did decent. I mean, they didn't have any opportunities to really show their USP of their footwork or anything like that. And they didn't get in the position to try and beat defenders because the game was so wet and tight. In terms of the centres, Dilunde gets a 7 and Kriel gets a 7, similar to the English boys. Maybe Dilunde could get a little bit more. Maybe Dilunde gets 7.5. They didn't have to do an awful lot, and the same as the English centres, they just kick chased and got involved that way. Nothing too impressive, just was a standard game for a back. And then Willemse at fullback for me gets a 7, similar to Arendse and Colby. Struggled under the high ball a little bit, but did well towards the end of the game. This is where the game changed. This is the South African replacements, in which it was so bold of Rassie and Neymar to sort of change up the team and really put some players under the media spotlight, with especially me looking at Lebok, being pulled off for 30 minutes in a World Cup semi-final will definitely take its toll on you as a player, but I'm sure they'll get around him and build his confidence back up. So in terms of the replacements, Fulry gets a 7.5, and a 9 for Nche, and then Koch for me gets an 8. I thought these boys were very exceptional coming on. I thought especially the replacement Loosehead was really, really good to really secure that scrum, and then Koch as well for the massive power in which they brought to the scrum and sort of set piece time in general. You could definitely see a massive change in power. As soon as these boys came on, I remember one of the English scrums just went back so fast, so fair play to them. Although Fulry didn't come on in the front row, I thought he had some good power, especially from that back row. It's hard to know in a scrum necessarily where the power is coming from, but it was definitely very powerful, I can tell you that. Snyman for me, 8.5. Craiger Smith, an 8. Faf de Klerk for me gets a 7. I thought the RG Snyman was very good when he came on. Obviously got the all-important try and was very physical, and he offers such a good offloading throw. Even when the ball's so greasy and slippy and like a bar of soap, he holds it like it's a tennis ball and sort of waves it around the back of contact, and is such a big threat. I mean, I'm glad as an English supporter it was a wet day as opposed to a dry day, because that's when players like RG Snyman really get the bit between their teeth and can really use their offloading game. And it wasn't the weather for it, so he had to keep the ball tight. And Craiger Smith came on, added good physicality, although he did come on later. But when I did see him run onto the pitch, my heart sunk a little bit, because I know what a dynamic, fast, strong, and a great jackler he is. So, it wasn't a good sight for the English when he came on. Faf de Klerk, similar to the English nines, he didn't do anything particularly awfully. He didn't really excel. He just sort of box kicked his way like the conditions permitted. And in terms of Pollard, a 9 as well. I thought he was exceptional. And then Willie LaRue, 7.5. Pollard was ultimately the turning point. He got such a huge boot on him, kicked it from sort of 48 metres off of the Nche and Koch penalty they earned from the scrum. So fair play to them. They knew what they were doing. They know Pollard's got it in his range, and as all good kickers do, they back themselves when it really does matter, and ultimately he secured the 3 points. Nche and Koch can be very proud of their performances, and I think a lot of plaudits must go to them. I'm tempted to put their scores up by 0.5 again, because they were just absolutely outstanding, and they did really prove to be the point of difference. The English starting 15 was very strong and definitely got the better of the South African starting 15, but it was the huge bomb squad and the bench which brought the win home for the South Africans. Devastation for the English, but it's all about how you finish. Sometimes in these big games you have to finish as strong as you start, otherwise you will ultimately not come away with the win. Let me know your thoughts on my scores in the comment section down below. In terms of man of the match, for me, I'm not going to give it to Pollard. This is a bit of a controversial one. For me, it's going to Unche, simply because without that scrum penalty, Pollard couldn't have done anything. I mean, it takes a huge amount of execution to kick from that distance and with such accuracy, but Unche earned the penalty. Multiple penalties, may I ask. You could probably even give that one, actually the last penalty, to Koch, because it was on his side of the scrum against Ellis Genge. But Unche, I thought at scrum time was just unreal, especially scrummaging against Carl Sinclair. Definitely got the better of him. On the English side, I'm going to give the player of the match to Owen Farrell. The drop goal, and he's secured every one of England's points, so I think he's the deserved player of England's game. But man of the match for me is going to Unche. Brilliant performance, and he ultimately turned the game around at the death. So fair play to him, fair play to the South African side, and good luck in the finals. I hope you do yourselves proud, and I hope you make a good game, because New Zealand will come to play, and New Zealand are a very strong side and will be licking their lips at what they saw from the semi-final. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on the game in the comment section down below. Let me know who was your man of the match and player of each team. And yeah, thank you very much for watching.